All right, we begin this afternoon session on a very sad note. In the last 24 hours, we've lost two really extraordinary community leaders here, both in Montgomery County and in our region. David Harrington was a member of the former Prince George's County Council, as well as a longtime member of the General Assembly. He was the past president of the Maryland Municipal League and also very engaged in the Maryland Association of Counties. He partnered with this body on numerous occasions on important regional issues. He is going to be deeply missed, and we send our condolences to his family, his colleagues, and his friends. We also learned this morning of the loss of Dr. Jay Kenney, the longtime division chief in the Department of Health and Human Services, who was one of the brightest lights we've ever had here in Montgomery County. Dr. Kenney's leadership in the area of aging and disabilities is frankly nationally renowned. We were fortunate to have his public service here in Montgomery County for more than 28 years. And we were also fortunate to all have benefited from his extraordinarily public service and leadership. I would like to ask that everybody join me in a moment of silence as we reflect on the legacy of these two extraordinary leaders today. Thank you. We now move on to our agenda this afternoon. We have two items. The first is a work session regarding Thrive 2050. I will turn it over to Ms. Dunn to walk us through the packet and what the expectation is for today.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. So you have a staff report for today, and you also have an addendum for today, and that was put out this morning. We are making sure that it is linked online. We were having some difficulty, but council did receive it this morning, and it's going to be the second half of what we'll cover today, so hopefully you have it with you. But the staff report that you have provides a brief overview of the chapters, the new chapters to the plan, the chapter on racial equity and social justice, the chapter on the economy, and the chapter on the environment. And as you go through the staff report, you'll see that for each of these chapters, it provides highlights, sort of the themes of the chapters, and then you'll see comments. So the council received comments on the new chapters and the existing chapters of the Fed Committee draft from the Coalition for Smarter Growth. The council also received comments from Greater Washington, but only on the racial equity and social justice chapter. And then this morning, council received a letter from DEP on the environment chapter, and so we will speak to that, but that's not included in either your staff report or your addendum. And I just wanted to note that while the council has continued to receive correspondence regularly on Thrive Montgomery 2050, people weighing in on whether they believe it should move forward or whether it shouldn't move forward, but direct comments for these new chapters only came from these organizations that are in the staff report today. So we only received direct comments on the chapters from the Coalition for Smarter Growth, from Greater Washington, and from DEP. So with that, the first chapter we'll be talking about today is the economy chapter. In your staff report, it is on circles 1 through 6 is a draft of that chapter. And I also note, so we'll talk a little bit about the comments and edits that we will, the council staff's putting forward, but I also want to invite the council members. It's a little odd that we do this type of work as a council body. Usually this would go to the committee first, so you'd really just be reviewing some recommendations by committee. So it does seem a little more detailed than usual. But also want to note that if you have edits that you find as you read through these chapters that staff perhaps did not include, that provide clarity or consistency, to please send that to council staff, and that we will incorporate those changes and we will note them for the public at a future work session, not to review them in detail, because if what you send hopefully is non-substantive, but if you feel it adds clarity and consistency, we will still consider those. So on the second page of the staff report are the comments we received on the economy chapter from the Coalition for Smarter Growth. And one comment in particular was that suggests that the chapter provide more attention to how the county's economy can grow in a way that ensures prosperity is felt and opportunities are provided for all. And we looked through the entire chapter in one place where we had worked with planning staff on much of this type of exercise for the bulk of the chapter, but in the conclusion to the chapter, we felt like there definitely was a place for more editing. And so on Circle 40 of your staff report, we've provided staff edits to these chapters, and for the economy chapter, you will see an edit there to just embellish that thought and that theme in the conclusion of that chapter. You have any questions on that? No. That was the main gist of what was going on with the comments for the economy. It was actually, we didn't receive much on that. So with that, I would be happy to turn it to the chapter on the environment if there are no questions.
Yes, Chairman Reamer.
I just wanted to reiterate, as you stated, that Thrive is a land use vision document, and the county has an economic development strategic plan that NCEDC has drafted, and it's a companion to this, just as the county has a climate action plan. Thrive is the land use companion to the county's climate action plan. We have a 10-year water and sewer plan. Thrive is a companion to that. There are a number of very high-level strategic plans and visions for different topics in the county. Sometimes Thrive is viewed as though it should encompass everything and it should have detailed plans for everything. However, it's important for us to just pick a lane here. This is the land use policy because it will then inform actual future land use decisions that the county council will make. And of course, Thrive doesn't create any decisions about how land will truly be used. All those decisions are made subsequently and largely reviewed by the county council. So I wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so with that, we'll turn to the chapter on the environment. You'll see that that is on circles 7 through 12 of the staff report. Again, the staff report provides sort of the highlights of that chapter, what are the major themes that it presents. And then the comment we received, one from the Coalition for Smarter Growth, it's noted in the staff report, was a request that it include more context setting and data, and in specific that it mention the state environmental health and resilience emergency resolution that was adopted. And so again, on Circle 41 of the staff report, you'll see that an edit has been made to address and to include that reference. And also recommends that it elaborate on a variety of topics. And then again, we received information this morning from DEP. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Levchenko to talk to you.
Yeah, and similar to some of the comments that Mr. Reamer just made about the overall plan, staff sees a similar tension with regard to the environment chapter and how much detail we want to get in versus highlight the major issues, provide direction for future master plans where there will be a lot more detail and a lot more specificity, given each master plan area will have its own challenges that could be very different. So staff did recognize that this chapter can't possibly answer a lot of those questions, but staff does think it raises them and it gives them a prominence that the council's been interested in. The very reason why we have the chapter before us is that the council felt it needed to have a higher prominence in the plan, as with some of the other chapters. So staff feels it accomplishes that. Certainly if we get more comments, we've gotten very few to date. If we get more, we can react to those and provide some feedback to the council on those. But we've not gotten a lot to date, and staff is comfortable with the chapter with some of the edits that Ms. Dunn mentioned.
Just really quickly, so for, again, a little bit more background and context, I know that there had been an effort to add components within of the existing draft of environmental, but what we were doing here is consolidating to sort of highlight its elevate its importance and make more clear how the dots are being connected among the various chapters from an environmental perspective. So I just want to confirm for the public that that's what we're doing here.
That's correct. What I also would add is, so we did not remove any of the environmental language that's existing in the rest of the Fed committee draft. It wasn't a substitution. It was a way to create what we've called a stage-setting chapter that sets the stage for what occurs in all the remaining, what I think of as policy chapters. The 6 chapters in the Fed committee draft They contain policies and practices related to all of these ideas. And those didn't change. All we have created is a chapter that, yes, elevates the topic of the environment as it is one of the 3 overarching themes. So that's really what the council body has done, is said, you have 3 overarching themes. We'd like to see a chapter on each one of those themes. That's what this does.
I've got Council Vice President Glass, followed by Councilmember Reamer, and then Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for this conversation about this chapter, because at the start of this process, I had expressed some concerns about the environmental aspect, and specifically about the need to reference trees and other things that are in this section. And one of the things I just want to vet a little bit, to have a conversation about, is I'm scrolling through, and I think it's on Circle 11, and it says the relationship between the Climate Action Plan and Thrive Montgomery 2050. Can you talk a little bit about the nature of that relationship, about these 2 documents, basically working plans that then have other policy decisions to be made thereafter, but speak to this symbiotic relationship, because it really is important. Mr. Levchenko.
Well, the Climate Action Plan, as well as the annual work plan associated with it, has very specific areas that it's looking at. And certainly the council has been briefed on that multiple times, and will continue to need to be updated on that, because it's also a living document as well. I think the Thrive Montgomery component, as is mentioned earlier, the land use side of it, and how you can generate a lot of co-benefits with climate change through some of these broader visions in Thrive Montgomery, was well highlighted in the initial plan that came over. I think what the council wanted was a bit more, direction or focus on the environmental piece of that. So we added this environmental chapter to try to put all of those elements, not just climate change, but stormwater management, forestation, all of those issues into a broader context, so that they weren't different pieces of the plan, they were all in one place. But Thrive Montgomery does not provide a menu of options for how you are going to achieve certain climate goals. The Climate Action Plan has some vagueness in it as well, just given the nature of the work involved. Some of the recommendations in the Climate Action Plan require a lot more study as well. So I think specificity, especially in Thrive Montgomery, would be just too much to ask with regard to the climate change issue. And we do have the Climate Action Plan and the Climate Work Plan process that is an ongoing effort and does have structure behind it. It has all the agencies contributing to that effort. And I think that provides the balance that the council wanted. The land use component here, and then the climate change work plan in detail referenced in the other document.
This certainly does spell out some of those concerns and the reality on the ground, specifically as you mentioned, and I'm looking at the stormwater management concerns, recognizing that climate change is most immediately creating more flooding here in Montgomery County and the DC region. And as we continue to grow and evolve, that needs to be mitigated and at the very least spelled out and called out, which is what I think the inclusion of that in this section, why that is so important. And so I appreciate that. I see Chair Anderson wants to chime in.
Yeah, I think there are 2 basic differences between these 2 documents. One is that the general plan is a longer term document and therefore by necessity more general, although the CAP is also at a pretty high level of generality because the CAP is designed to provide a roadmap for near-term action. It has a little bit more specificity. The second one is, of course, as Keith just said, that this is a land use and public infrastructure plan. CAP is more comprehensive, and I just want to emphasize that they're integrated. Our staff has worked closely with Adriana Hochberg and the other executive branch staff and working groups that they've put together. So these things are very tightly integrated and complementary.
Thank you for elaborating on the collaboration that's taken place behind this, in the writing or drafting of this along the way. But I'll just conclude by saying that of everything that we are dealing with, climate change is at the top of the list. And so the inclusion of this chapter is extremely important, and knowing the relationships and the policy sharing of policy priorities, I'll put it that way, across county government is going to be extremely important as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Reamer, followed by Councilmember Friedson.
I was going to expand on that same topic, how the climate action plan is a symbiotic plan, and I just share that the original draft of Thrive had separate chapters in each of these areas. A new draft was written that focused more on streamlining and consolidating, and we wanted to integrate in the Fed draft. We wanted to elevate these three issues, and so we included a section in each chapter that highlighted our key goals around those issues and what we thought Thrive would achieve. And we've heard many people feel like it's still not prominent enough, and so this draft will create standalone chapters on these three in order to ensure that we're providing the distinctive treatment of each of the issues that we should. So that's the evolution of the document here, and want to just make that point.
Thank you. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you to colleagues. I'll echo the larger point here. I raised the kind of underlying point as well that, on this particular issue, residents were heard loud and clear that there was a real interest in having separate economic and environmental chapters spelled out, that integrating it within the plan was not as much as residents wanted. And so that's part of the exercise that we're doing, which I think highlights the need to do it while still recognizing that this is a land use vision and a land use document. You can't talk about land use without talking about environment, without talking about economic development. So I think that's important. We'll get to racial equity and social justice in a moment. So I appreciate the fact that we're doing this. I appreciate the comments about the importance of it, and also of the integration and close coordination with the climate action plan. They have to be intertwined. I don't think there's anything more important, more impactful when it comes to addressing climate at the local level than land use and transportation, which is at the core of what a general plan is focused on doing: where we grow, how we grow, the type of communities that we build, the way in which we live, and the impact that living our daily lives has on each other and on the environment. I think it's important. I know that there haven't been a tremendous number of comments specifically on the new chapters, which is understandable given that they have just very recently come out. So I just wanted to note two things. One, I hope that we, until October 11th at least, as we, that will be the time at which we, if we keep to our current schedule, we need to have language agreed upon as a body to move forward to approve before the end of October, if we, keeping with that schedule. And so I hope that there's an opportunity for residents to continue to weigh in as they have. Which we should encourage, and I encourage. I'll also note that there are a number of residents who have weighed in on the Fed committee draft, which incorporated a number of elements that are now included in, or not included in, the environmental chapter now, or in the economic development chapter that we just talked about. And I think it's important that those previously raised issues be elevated, and that we discuss them and determine whether or not they're appropriate for inclusion, not necessarily just in the Fed committee draft in the chapters that we're going to be taking up next week, but in these new chapters, because they could, some of the comments that were previously made for that draft for how an environmental issue, for instance, was handled, perhaps now, more importantly, should be incorporated and included in that. So I just wanted to note that for staff and also for colleagues. I'm going to be going through those comments, and I hope staff will as well, and I'm sure colleagues will. The one high-level thing that I wanted to note here, because there are a number of comments and feedback that we have received on environmental issues following the Fed committee's work. But I do think we need inclusion of the Potomac River and the Chesapeake Bay and its importance to our environmental sustainability, the broader water supply. And so I hope that we can find a way to incorporate that. There are a number of really thoughtful comments that were provided based on the Fed committee draft related to that issue. And so I just wanted to note that and think it would be helpful if we were to think about that. But I just wanted to raise the broader point, and perhaps maybe Ms. Dunn or Mr. Lubchenko, you could note how we're thinking about addressing some of those other environmental issues that have been raised following the Fed committee draft, but up until this point that might not be specific to the language in this chapter, and how we intend to take that up.
Staff has been following comments that have come in after the publishing of the Fed committee draft, keeping track of those. Councilmember Friedson, you're right. Anywhere that we will have and we'll see comments related to the environment, if it is relevant to actually making them this change to this chapter as well, we'll bring that to you as we go forward and we talk about the new chapters or the existing chapters. We'll also note where it would make an appropriate change to these chapters. We'll keep an eye on both.
Appreciate that. The only last thing that I'll raise related to this, and we get to it to a certain degree in the racial equity and social justice chapter, but it's relative to this chapter as well. The conflict of the general direction of smart growth and of transit focus and its impact on vulnerable communities. And I think it's really important as we talk about that we don't necessarily, I don't believe at least, that we necessarily need to abandon the longstanding smart growth goals of the county because of the environmental imperative that we have, and because of, as stated, the impacts that has disproportionately on residents of color and on low-income residents in particular, and disproportionately, and there's overwhelming evidence to suggest that. But we have to be sensitive in the way that we do it. And so talking about how we implement and who is incorporated in that implementation, I think is important. We're not getting into implementation as part of this. It's a high-level document. But I do think that it's important to note, because I do think that there is a little bit of a friction that we see from the outreach that was done, and that the our consultant has helped us to see, of this question of a real concern of where do I fit into this vision for the county. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the vision is wrong, but it means that there is a real palpable feeling of whether or not everybody is included in that vision, and we have to be really intentional about the way that we talk about that. It doesn't mean that we focus on single occupancy vehicles, again, like we did in the 1964 plan, but it means that we have to be very intentional about the way that we implement the plan, and we talk about the policy vision moving forward, and finding the right way to balance that in this plan, I think, is really important. But I just wanted to note that that is a very important balance that we need to strike and get right, because the implications are extremely significant and they disproportionately impact the most vulnerable members of our community. So I just wanted to note that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Ms. Dunn?
Thank you. With that, I think we're concluding the comments on the environment chapter, and we will move on to the chapter on racial equity and social justice if there's no further comments. So at this point, on the staff report, we're at the bottom of page 4. And so the first initial comment on the chapter on racial equity and social justice is that there are several maps within the chapter that were provided by the consultant, which have a lot of interesting information on them, and they are layered, but they also are very difficult to read. So that is something that we will work on, and as a matter of fact, it's a great point to mention that in the chapter on the economy, all of the graphics and illustrations were taken out because some of them were duplicative of some of the ones that are in the introduction. And so once the council lands on the plan, the draft plan, planning, and this is very common, Director Wright can mention, talk to this as well, but it's very common that in that process of going back and implementing the resolution with all the text, planning will also make sure that all of the illustrations, graphics, maps, everything are consistent, they address the text that they're related to, that they are not duplicative, and that they're clear. And so I just wanted to mention that in general, because a couple people have mentioned those maps as being unclear to read, but this is global for the whole draft. We'll make sure that all those graphics, maps, and tables are consistent, clear, and readable. So with that, the next comment is one that came from the Coalition for Smarter Growth, and it was a suggestion to focus less on planning theory, generalized planning history, and more on specific community development history in Montgomery County. And during part of this process, the planning staff had also created their own racial equity and social justice chapter, which they provided to the consultant team as reference for their work or to use instead of, or whatever they provided it to them, and that is in the packet as well. Given the time available for significant amount of drafting before the body, rather than adding a section that is lengthy on development history in Montgomery County, there could be information in this chapter that directs future master plans to include such information so that it can be relevant to the geographic area in which the master plan is occurring, but can also be intentional to inform that master planning process, well, what the development history was there. And it could also be something that, in the planning department, actually, Director I could speak to this as well, has been doing this in a lot of our recent master plans. They've taken on the goal of them considering what racial equity and social justice means in the master planning process, and they've been providing these sections. So I think that will continue, but just something that could get mentioned in the general plan as well. Is something master planning should do. And the second suggestion is the council can revisit what it means. Currently now the language in your racial equity and social justice legislation related to master plans is that they need to consider the racial equity and social justice impacts of master planning. And I don't think that everyone always understands what that means, consider. And so I don't think it's something that needs to get determined today or even before the end of trying to adopt this plan, but it might be something to come back at and think about, is there a way to make it a little more determinative, what the council's expectation is with that.
I've got Councilmember Jawando, followed by Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, and I appreciate the quick work on these chapters, and wanted to follow up, and I think this was the appropriate place to do it, but I think it's applicable to the whole plan. But in the context of racial equity and social justice, when we went through this work in Fed, those 9 sessions, we worked really hard to add things along the way in the context of the draft that we had. And one of the things that I added, and Ms. Dunn will remember this, I think, a couple of times along the way, as will the planning board and staff, was making sure, in my view, since this is a high-level 30-year document, we had all the tools in the toolbox to achieve the vision for an equitable, prosperous county for every resident so we needed all the tools in the toolbox. We didn't want to take anything off the table so that when we do implement this through master plans, in sector plans and in ZTAs and the like, that we had it. And one of those things in the context of housing, which was mentioned by the Inspire Green folks almost verbatim, the other day, was this addressing this tension that Councilmember Friedson alluded to in his last comments, that where do I fit in with all the new growth and all the things that are happening and the transportation system? How do I make sure that for my community, I'm a part of that? And a big concern that we heard and was emphasized in the report that we got on from Inspire was the concern about displacement and the concern about the cost of housing. And even going back months ago when we took this up in Fed, I added several times renter protections and references to the growing numbers of renters in some parts of our county. Nearly half of the folks in those communities are renting, but countywide over a third. And so that is at the same time, while we're calling for more types of housing, and I think this is the words that the Inspire folks mentioned, not just more housing, which we need and more types, but also rent stabilization. And that's a policy that we are dealing with now in various forms. But in this racial equity chapter, as I read it, I don't see as much reference to renter protections and those types of policies. And I wanted to ask, I could have missed it, but I did see it referenced in the comments from CSG, as the tenant rights being a really important component. So I just wanted to ask, I guess, first to Ms. Dunn, am I just missing it as a reference to a potential strategy to address some of these concerns? Or I know we had included it in other places in the draft, so I just wanted to kind of ask that. I know there's a lot of documents flying around.
Yes. What I would say is, in my memory, I don't recall there being a specific section either in the chapter on racial equity and social justice that is really focused in on the renter experience and what that means for that community. And we could look at adding some of that language in. I do recall, and I think that within the different policies and practices, there definitely is attention to renters. And we can make sure that language remains or is strengthened if need be. But I don't believe that you will find it in the chapter.
Yeah, so I'd love to work with you and others between now and the time that we have to try to include that. I think it's an important population to speak to, both from the home ownership side, for people who want to move from renting to owning, but also to the many who will be renters and are renters, and how that's a part of our goal of equity as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. President. One quick question and then a comment on, I guess, page 16 on the racial equity piece, right below the map. This is median household income. Just for clarification, because it says it is no coincidence that the median household income map follows the education attainment map, which it's pretty clear just looking at it. It's almost similar to the focus school map from CPS, which has been decades and is still the same. But then it says the highly educated communities in East County far outpace incomes in other parts of the county. Can you clarify that? Maybe I'm just not reading it right.
I don't even think I can find that yet.
Okay, it's popping, for me it's
Circle
showing
6,
16,
yeah.
circle 16. It says the highly educated communities in East County far outpace incomes in other parts of the county.
Yeah, if I had to guess, I would think that there's a typo in that sentence because
Okay,
they're
so
mixing
I
two
think that
different
should
ideas.
be corrected because
Yeah.
again,
We will.
I thought, well, if that's the case, then wow, all the data we've been receiving has been wrong. So if that could be
Thank you.
correct, I think that'd be important.
Of course.
The only other thing I will say, because I do want to follow up on what Councilmember Joanda was commenting on as such a central conundrum that so many places are dealing with around the country, and we are dealing with it here. I know Washington, D.C. has dealt with it, et cetera, and it's the whole issue of gentrification and where is that balance and that sweet spot, because obviously, one of the things that we constantly are trying to address are the lack of amenities and the lack of investment in particular areas of the county, which also happen to be the areas where you have existing, market affordable housing. And, I know I personally have been very frustrated at the sort of, circular conversations sometimes when trying to bring certain amenities to my district in particular. Remember, trying to bring a grocery store to Plaza del Mercado in Lay Hill and being told that the market, did not support a high-end or a, middle of the ground supermarket, et cetera, and really had to, fight really hard to get Aldi's there. And so I think this is a really important point because it is, again, this circular issue of if you're trying to attract amenities, you have to build housing that it attracts folks that have perhaps, middle to some higher income, et cetera. But then you also want to protect, existing market affordable housing is what we did in Glenmont when we did our upzoning of the Glenmont Shopping Center. We did preserve some of the housing, especially multifamily housing around the shopping center, but we also went ahead and upzoned the shopping center significantly, as well as provided what was then Privacy World the ability to move forward with some market affordable townhouses and large apartments, which is the missing middle, in order to see if there could be, an incentivize the Glenmont Shopping Center to move forward with something. They're still not willing to move forward with something, and it's been such a difficulty with the folks who live in that area who don't understand, why is it that you can't do something? Well, it's private property, so you can only try to set forth the conditions. And so I just want to share that because, it's been something, I think, I know when I joined the council, that was the big thing, right? People would say to me when I was running, where are the restaurants in the East County and the Mid County? Where are the amenities? We deserve that too, et cetera. And in the same breath, folks would say, but we don't want any development. We don't want more housing. And so how do you solve that problem? It is important and it is significant. And I think that I think it is going to be important to really, hone into that challenge and see what are some of those possibilities that you can tailor to particular areas as you're trying to incentivize. So I wanted to share that, and once again, it was also brought up by the rating agencies, what are you doing to redevelop in areas of the county that have not seen any kind of development? They didn't want to hear about just the I-270 corridor, Bethesda. They wanted to know about, the East County as well, because it is about figuring out how do we, balance and find those opportunities. So again, this is not new. It's a very old issue, but an important one because we don't want to then tip the balance and, push ahead with some redevelopment, with some amenities, et cetera. And then the people that have been living there historically, they can't partake because they've been priced out. And conversely, if we don't do something, then it's not fair either vis-a-vis racial equity and social justice because they don't have access to jobs or transportation or amenities either, and that's not right. And so I guess that's just my editorial commentary on what I believe will be a big task of the next council, to now hone into how does that look specifically and how can you target some interventions so that we find some balance and not just create bigger problems for those communities as well. And lastly, in closing, tying it back to why engagement is so important, because we need to hear from the folks that live there, not just those who claim to represent their voices, but the people who live there day in and day out and have to deal with all of those challenges, but also have particular desires for their families. And that's why engagement in an authentic way is going to be so important as well. So no particular question, just the commentary on I think how we need to move forward in this particular part of the chapter.
May I make a quick comment on that?
Yes, please do.
Yes, which is that we agree completely with everything Councilmember Navarro just said. One of the things that is important maybe for the council to know is that ever since delivering this document in April of 2021, we've been continuing to study, evolve, think about new tools, think about new ideas. One of the projects we're working on is the Farrell & Briggs Cheney Plan. And in the Farrell & Briggs Cheney Plan, we've been, again, innovating on different ways to do outreach. We've been honing new tools for outreach, including the door-to-door canvassing. And we've also been thinking about, in a place like Farrell and Briggs Cheney, how can you preserve the naturally occurring affordable housing? And the County Department of Housing and Community Affairs, again, thanks to the council, has more money now to think about how to accomplish that. But also how through, and this is where Thrive comes in, through thinking about some of the existing properties and thinking about compact form of development, you can actually make land available that has never had housing on it, so it doesn't displace existing housing. You can make that available for all kinds of both market rate and affordable housing. So for an example, one idea in the Farrell and Briggs Cheney plan, and we've been talking with the folks at the Adventist World Headquarters, and also with the folks at Verizon. Can you use some of the land that's currently parking lots and open space on those properties and add housing where housing never existed, so you aren't displacing anyone, and think about a more compact form of development that allows you to add market rate housing in a community that maybe has a lot of naturally occurring affordable housing, and you can sort of create a balance there. And so even while the council has been considering Thrive, we've been sort of moving along in our planning thought and in projects like Farrell and Briggs Cheney to try to tackle exactly some of the issues that Councilmember Navarro has brought up. So, we look forward to bringing that plan to the council after we bring it to the planning board. I think we're all thinking along the same lines. We also have done a lot of research, which Casey may want to talk about, on neighborhood change in the county, because our experiences in Montgomery County are very, in terms of gentrification, displacement, disinvestment, they're very different than the experiences in the District of Columbia. Suburban experiences for communities of color, which have long roots in the county, but were generally very small kinship communities, they have been affected by neighborhood change differently than some of the more urban areas, such as the District of Columbia. I don't know if you want to add to that.
I'd just suggest on page 44 and 45 of your packet, there's the draft of the chapter that we provided that discusses some of this research, and I think it's very much in line with what you're getting at, that it's not, we obviously want to prevent gentrification and displacement, but we also want to prevent the concentration of low-income households, because that really shuts the door on the kind of private as well as public investment in amenities that everybody deserves. And so if you'd like, we could work with the staff to see how we might incorporate some of that.
Yeah, that would be really great. One last comment is that, when I joined the council, because it was in the middle of a term, the decision had just been made to build a second parking garage in Glenmont. And think about what would have happened if there had been more forward thinking around, co-location of housing. And so, again, I think it is important to constantly be thinking about these issues that these master plans present themselves, because once you do it, and I looked into it, what would it cost then to correct that? I mean, it was just cost prohibitive. But that could have been something that should have been done at that point, to really address an issue in that area and leverage a metro station. So anyhow, I think there is history, and you're right, it is a very different story in terms of what other jurisdictions like DC have dealt with. However, we need to make sure that we adapt to our circumstances to ensure that there isn't that type of displacement, but that the people who are low income, also don't feel like, whoa, this is a huge discrepancy between the amenities in my area, in my neighborhood, in other parts of the county. Why is that continue to be the case? You could argue that there is a sort of, opposite almost impact of this whole gentrification conversation, that is that goes against racial equity and social justice. So anyway, thank you.
Mr. President, may I make a brief comment?
Yeah, please.
So at the Racial Equity and Social Justice Advisory Committee meeting last night, there was an issue around food insecurity. And as we talk about access to income, access to food and healthy food, there was a question about the communities that had no supermarkets, food apartheid as opposed to food deserts. And we know that there's a brand new giant on Cherry Hill Road, but there are other communities that really need and want supermarkets as well.
Definitely. Councilmember Reamer, followed by Councilmember Friedson. My fault. And actually, it's Councilmember Reamer, Councilmember Katz, and then Councilmember Friedson. My fault.
Thank you, Selena, for that. It really gets at the point, and I really want to associate myself with Councilmember Navarro's comments because I think she's highlighting the actual situation on the ground here in Montgomery County and what we have been involved in. And I joined the council just after Councilmember Navarro. But what we have been involved in, and we've worked together on a lot of these challenges, and the whole council has worked on it, many council members, Councilmember Hucker, is figuring out how to strike that balance of bringing the benefits of growth and progress and change and achieving our social goals. And there are some communities in the county where we feel that there is a real lack of amenities, and we want more development, and we want to even out concentrations of poverty. And there are other communities where that's less of an issue. But I think we have been very successful in many of our areas. Let's look at Wheaton. We have fostered so much development in Wheaton. We have spent so much public resources building a higher quality of life there. And the Metro opened there in 96 or something like that. I'm concerned that if you read this chapter as it is written today, you would say we shouldn't have Metro in Wheaton, we shouldn't encourage development there. When in fact, what we have achieved in Wheaton and in downtown Silver Spring and what we have hopefully set in motion in Glenmont is that we can have development and community continuity or even community growth. I mean, Wheaton today is a very different community than it was 25 years ago. I think it's more diverse. The businesses there are bustling. I mean, it's just full of small businesses, which isn't to say that there aren't always issues. Every geography has challenges, and we're always working on them. But I would like to be sure that the vision of how to achieve racial equity and social justice in this document embraces a vision that development and change can bring benefits if managed well. And that in no way leans against Councilmember Joando's important points. They go hand in hand. You can't do housing without a mind to tenant protections. And that's why, just speaking very much for myself, I was very enthusiastic about passing landmark tenant legislation that then Councilmember Elrich proposed. We worked that legislation through, we got it passed. And that's just one small example, but throughout the pandemic, we've worked on supporting tenants with eviction legal advice. We have probably done as much, if not more, than most communities in this country around rental assistance with our COVID relief money. So these things can go together, and I believe we are doing as well in that mission as any community I can think of. Our efforts are sincere, and I think they get results. So I would just like to, as we look at this chapter, I view it as an opportunity to make that point and to ensure that the East County, which one of the main objectives of Thrive is to bring back a vision that the East County is a place where we should have development, because the East County was removed from the general plan for development. There was a view that if we just said we don't want development there, then it would remain the way it was 35 years ago, 40 years ago, whenever that was that decision was made. But what happened was the East County gradually lost its amenities. It lost its restaurant scene. It became further and further from jobs without transportation access. The roads became more clogged with people coming from Howard County. Howard County got new development, and that was not a success. That was not a success for Montgomery County. And we would like to change that dynamic, and that's what we're hoping to achieve with Thrive. So and we want to achieve that in the name of ensuring that every neighborhood and every community has access to the same opportunities. So as we proceed with editing, I just implore us to embrace the vision that Councilmember Navarro just espoused and ensure that this chapter reflects that kind of thinking and doesn't seem to lean in the opposite direction and only viewing development as a threat and as something that won't bring benefits to the community. At the same time, not being naive and not turning our back to the very real challenges that it also brings. And I hope we can make some changes and strike that balance, because I don't think we're there yet with this draft, but I think we can get there. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Katz, followed by Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I too appreciate the fast work on these topics, but like any fast work, we have to be concerned how we're communicating. And as an example, we received today the addendum. Obviously, the public would not have had an opportunity to comment, and we need to make certain that the public has an opportunity to give us their advice and to comment. I think it needs to be said pretty much probably every time we have this discussion, for the 3rd District of Montgomery County, about 85 to 90% of the new 3rd District, not the exact one that's today, but of the new 3rd District, will not be under the Thrive legislation. And perhaps whenever we send out communication, that should be noted, because as an example, in Rockville and Gaithersburg, since they have their own zone, I know you know, Pam, but since they have their own planning and zoning authority, they're not under this legislation. And I do believe there's been confusion because of that. Though the fact that their next door neighbor might not be affected, it's certainly going to affect them, because we're all affected by whatever it happens, whether it be in the 3rd District or any other district. And I do think that we need to be very, very concerned, and Councilmember Navarro certainly touched on this, that we need to hear from people who are directly affected. And not only for the people who are living there and will have to live with this, we also need to hear from people who would like to live there and who would like to understand what we need to go through. And displacement is a huge concern. I hear it all the time, and that's from people who are renting and from people who are currently owning, because they're concerned about the pressures. If something happens, what will it do to their next door neighbor, and how what will be next door to them? I think we need to double down on communicating, and on this document especially, other documents as well, for the writing and the rewriting of the document. It started out confusing. With all the writing and rewriting of the document, it's only gotten more confusing. People don't know exactly where we are in the process, and what it means, and how much they should comment, and if they've commented on it before and somebody's saying, well, we'll take it out, we'll consider taking it out. Well, it hasn't been taken out just because you're considering it. So I think that needs to be as clear as we can. It's the additions of the chapters have been a big help, and I think that's we've certainly had a step in the right direction. And then on the whole idea of affordable housing, obviously there's plenty of opinion on this document, and I've heard several people say to me that they're in favor. One of the things that they like most about this Thrive 2050 is that it's going to bring more affordable housing. And then a person, not to say that it was thousands now, but a person said, but if it doesn't bring more affordable housing, I'm not in favor of it. Well, I think we need to figure out what the word when we talk about affordable housing, and I brought this up before, but when we talk about affordable housing, whether it be for renters or for someone who owns, we need to really come up with, as best we can, a dollar figure. I understand we're not going to put a dollar figure in this document, but a dollar figure what we're actually talking about. I had someone just recently say, well, you know, it won't be $1 million house, but this could bring, because of the densities, a $650,000 house. Well, it would be a less expensive home for someone, but that's not affordable. So I think we need to try to be, as best we can, and it's difficult, but as best we can, I think we need to be as upfront, which I've always kept saying several times, but as upfront and as clear as we possibly can on what we are doing and how we are doing it and what we will ultimately be able to achieve or try to achieve. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I've got Councilmember Friedson, followed by Councilmember Rice.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, thank you. A lot of comments that I was going to say have been said, so I'll just make a couple points here. I had raised in the prior conversation about this the issue of this investment versus displacement, and that's what we're talking about now. This is a really important aspect. It's not to say that we shouldn't talk about displacement in the document. It's to say that we shouldn't diminish disinvestment, because for generations, really since the general plan that we're effectively replacing here, the conversation has largely been a false choice, from what you're hearing here, about avoiding displacement and therefore choosing disinvestment. And that's why a big part of this plan was really focused on the East County and reintroducing the Route 29 corridor, which I'm glad Chair Reamer mentioned, because that was a core tenet of this. It was one of the main conversations that we had as we started the conversation about this several years ago. It was one of the main focuses as we started our work in the Fed committee. And I think that is really important, because the Route 29 corridor is really a question of not largely displacement in Montgomery County, it's largely disinvestment. It's a lack of amenities, it's a lack of transportation infrastructure, and it's a lack of the grocery stores. One of the most obvious examples of the issues that you have when it comes to disinvestment, as we just heard, and as was discussed at the Racial Equity Social Justice Committee meeting, was food deserts, was access to fresh produce, was the fact that, how far does it take for you to go to a grocery store? And, that is a key part of, what the intention of this plan is trying to accomplish. And I think getting out of this conversation of disinvestment versus displacement, where we talk about them, we don't diminish displacement as an issue, but we note that disinvestment has been a prevailing issue in Montgomery County. And, I think it's really important that we be data-driven in how we move forward. In all of our policy conversations, data is critical, and it should be local data. But as we do that, I would say the plural of anecdote isn't data, but every anecdote is a story, and we need to make sure that we validate those stories. And I think that's the balance that we have to accomplish when it comes to this. But it can't be about a fear of displacement, and therefore we keep communities down, and we continue to allow for disinvestment to take place and a lack of adequate access to transportation, to food, to jobs, to the type of activities that we want. It has to be about lifting communities up and then making sure that we don't leave anybody behind when we're doing it. And I think it's the second part of the lifting communities up that we have to be really specific about, and that's what we ought to focus on. And I think that in many ways is what I heard loud and clear from Councilmember Navarro in her comments, in the importance of communities needing to have amenities, jobs, transportation, and that we shouldn't be foregoing those things in certain communities for fear of an outcome. We should be achieving the outcomes that we know we want and need, and making sure that in the pursuit of those outcomes that we are fully aware of the consequences of policy decisions and that we're focused on making sure that we don't leave anybody behind. That is intended, I believe, to be, what this general plan is trying to do. Obviously, we have a little bit of, wordsmithing to do here. Adding in the chapters was very important as part of that, but, we have a few more weeks to get it right. But, I think that the comments that have been made here specifically on this question of what is specifically the experience that is happening in Montgomery County, and there is a lot of evidence to suggest this. Silver Spring is a perfect example of a place that has gotten more diverse. It's gotten more diverse in incomes, high incomes and low incomes, and middle incomes, more diverse in race. Our new residents are largely more diverse than the incumbents in Montgomery County, and I think it's really important to note. And the last thing that I'll say, there is data that we have that demonstrates that Montgomery County has gotten dramatically more diverse, but it's also gotten more educated. And I think we have to get out of this destructive conversation where we talk about the idea that certain communities are reflected by certain things and other communities are reflected by other things. There have been real positive aspects of it, and the goal should be to lift everybody up to make sure that everybody in Montgomery County has access to good jobs, to good transportation, to good open spaces, to good quality of life, to the type of amenities that we want and need. I think there is still some refining on that in this chapter. I think the intention was to get there. I think we've got a little bit of work to do, but I'm really glad that the conversation has been framed the way that it has, because I think it's really important that we frame these issues in an appropriate way and in a way that reflects everybody in the county and what's actually happening in Montgomery County. So with that, I'll yield back to you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Councilmember Rice, and then Councilmember Jawando.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. Let me just say this, that there's been a lot of great discussion today, and one of the things in reading through the new chapter on racial equity and social justice I think is still lacking a bit is when it comes to education. As the chair of the Education and Culture Committee, but as a person who knows all too well the empowerment of education, it can't be lost on us that we have to be more intentional. As I attended the brand new Harriet Tubman Elementary School for the opening, as you heard Councilmember Navarro talk about Odessa Shannon Middle School and what that does and transforms the community, we have to make sure that our planning is also intentional when it comes to having access. And I think the wording in the paragraph was something like ensuring that established communities provide access to communities. What it should be is that those communities should be the access points for high quality levels of education. And so I just wanted to talk about that a bit and just make sure that we have a little bit more of a stronger intentional statement when it comes to this. We know all too well that so many schools in our communities of color and of lower socioeconomic status continue to struggle. And that then affects everything from healthcare disparities to economic opportunity that isn't the same as some of their counterparts in other more affluent, more connected areas. And so I just really think that for this being an aspirational document for us, we have to be aspirational in our statements, especially when it comes to these, by our expectations that we're going to have high performing, high quality schools in these areas as we develop, and make sure that those are there for all of our residents across the county, not just regional in terms of East County or, Mid County or Up County, but we need to say in our neighborhoods, in our communities of color, in our communities that are socioeconomically challenged. And so I think from that perspective, if we can come up with some sort of a wording for that, that would be great. But I agree with everything else that everyone has said to this point. I really think that we've come a long way in terms of making sure that this document addresses so many of the issues. It's very interesting as we're talking about this here in Thrive. I'm actually at a conference with the National Association of Counties, and the new president's main focus is on housing. And so there's going to be a big announcement tomorrow about this. And so this is going to be a nationwide effort for counties across this country. So it really is timely from that perspective in terms of working with Thrive. And I think that this, again, represents a great document and showcases that Montgomery County is taking this seriously and really coming up with innovative ways to address so many of the issues that we're challenged with. But do think that if we put a little bit stronger of a message in there when it comes to access to education, that'll be even better for us in moving forward. So back to you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Councilmember Juando had a follow-up question.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Appreciate the conversation. And Chairman Anderson mentioned this, and I wanted to ask a question and make a brief comment. You mentioned the great work that you all did on looking at poverty concentration versus displacement. And I think if on that chart that you had, I think it's on, I forget which circle it's on, but 45, 46, or 60, I can't remember. But it shows basically, and I want to give you a chance to comment on this, that DC, the displacement bar, the blue bar, is much higher than the income, the concentration of poverty bar. In Montgomery County, it's more comparable, right? Like, it's much lower. I think it was 16 concentration of poverty, and I want you to explain what that means, and 19 displacement, or I might have inversed those numbers. But could you explain what that means? And so that I took it to mean that we've had a little bit of this, but some places we haven't had as much as other parts in the region, and our story is a little different.
That's right. If you look on page, it's circle 44, the chart in the middle of the page shows that in Prince George's County, there's more than twice as many census tracts experiencing concentration of low-income households as census tracts experiencing displacement. In Montgomery County, it's a little more even, but it's still 19 experiencing concentration of low incomes, 16 experiencing displacement, and then there's 6 census tracts where everybody's going up. So you have low income, middle income, high income people. That's actually pretty good. Fairfax County also split, but flipped a little bit. A few more census tracts that have displacement than concentration of low income. But then, and this I think is the point you're making, is Washington, D.C., Arlington, Alexandria. Washington, D.C. is 10 times as many census tracts experiencing displacement as experiencing concentration of poverty. Arlington County, 16 to 1. Alexandria City, 10 to 1. So what's going on in the neighborhoods of these communities is totally different on the Maryland side of the line, particularly in Prince George's County, but also in Montgomery County, versus what's going on in D.C. and close in Northern Virginia. Fairfax looks a lot like us, but I would say more similar. But yes, you've got it exactly right. We're trying to give some nuance and some texture to this discussion, because not every neighborhood is experiencing the same thing. Not every jurisdiction is in fact, some are going in opposite directions.
Right. I appreciate that. It's one of the things that is one of the great things about Montgomery County, but it's also embedded a challenge in that we are such a great place. If you think of the Wallet Hub, diverse cities that just came out again, and we have, 3 of the top 10, or 4 of the top 10 rather, but 3 in the top 5. Silver Spring being one of those, which if you look at those 6 census tracts where you're having the income coming up, some of those are in Silver Spring. I think is I see Gwen nodding. Yes, I can see you too, so it's good. It's a good interaction here. And I think it's one of those dichotomies where, but we still do have some that are experiencing displacement, right? So we have a version of everything. We have a little bit of everything going on, and it can almost be. That's why it's so important to have the data and have the community place-based solutions and have all the tools available to us, and realize it might not be the same thing everywhere that we need. And I agree. That's why I'm so proud to be from Montgomery County. I think we are a place that can literally have it all. That has great jobs, a great economy, great school in every neighborhood, affordable, attainable housing, in a thriving business community in a great environment. And it's just we're gonna have to tailor it to our needs. And so I think that's why Thrive is just really important to get past, and to have the tools in the toolbox, and then just be really wide-eyed and honest about that. We're gonna have to do different things, and not be just all dogmatic about going one way or the other. I called it more housing for more people. I think in your chapter you call it more of everything. And so I just wanted to emphasize that point, and I appreciate the context of that work, because I think it'll help us as we implement Thrive. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I don't see any other comments from colleagues at this time. Ms. Dunn, I'll turn it back over to you.
Great, thank you. So now I think it's the perfect segue into moving to the addendum, which is was written in response to the comments received, I think after 5 on Monday, from Greater Washington. And so weren't able to get them into the initial original packet. And so on the first page of the addendum, I'm just going to go through, they have quite a few specific comments. So unlike the comments that were from the Coalition for Smarter Growth that were broader in nature, the ones here are very specific about language that is in the chapter. And on the first one, it says, it's on page 45, and in the addendum it provides the text in consideration or concern. I don't want to read the whole thing, but it's text regarding displacement, the conversation we're having right now. And the comment is that the paragraph should be revised to reflect on-the-ground conditions in Montgomery today. And staff's response is that while there does seem to be an edit that can be made to this section, the beginning of the statement begins with across America. It is not a view intended to reflect just Montgomery County, but is trying to set the stage for a national concern that displacement is something that occurs in our communities and causes the people that the focus group reach was intended to bring their voices forward, what their concerns are. And so the suggestion here is to just make a minor edit to that. It's at the top of the second page of the addendum.
Councilmember Reamer.
Where can we view the addendum? It's not linked from the main
It
packet.
is now. I also emailed it to everyone this morning, if you have
But
your
it's
email.
not linked from the main pack. I mean, I've seen this document. I'm not saying I haven't seen this document. I'm just trying to. It was posted during the so if I refresh my page, then. Got it. Okay, I will refresh. Thank you. I wanted to make sure everyone could
Sure,
see
of
the same
course.
thing.
Right. We were concerned when we first got seated that it wasn't accessible, but it is now.
Councilmember Friedson.
I'm just consulting a little bit with Councilmember Navarro. I figured I should turn my microphone on and just talk about it broadly. But I do think it would be helpful here to note the national trend and give voice to the concern that's being raised, which is absolutely legitimate and very important. But I also think we have to give the Montgomery County experience here too for the context, because this isn't a national plan. This is a Montgomery County general plan. And so, you know, at least my personal preference would be that we not exclude the national trend and this significant concern, but that we also add the context of what the data reflects in Montgomery County related to concentrations of poverty, displacement, et cetera. There was just a very robust conversation about the data that we have that is available, and I think I don't have suggested language at this moment, but I think finding a way to incorporate that important exchange that just took place between Councilmember Jawando and Chair Anderson, and finding a way to provide some level of context here, I think would be helpful personally.
Thank you. Oh, Councilmember Navarro.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on Councilmember Friedson's comment. I think that is important because, this is a general plan that will be in place for quite a while, and perhaps including almost like a snapshot of Montgomery County when this was adopted will make a big difference, because there have been significant changes, and that has affected, the sort of direction of these planning decisions. I think that in the addendum, it says on page 46, and it reads, social justice is a process by which working class people begin to access the privileges only enjoyed by the historically privileged classes to afford healthy lifestyles and to experience education and build environments which inspire them to lead happier, more productive lives. And I think that was interesting to me because I think it encapsulates what we just discussed, that, we're never going to achieve that unless we're also willing to build different types of housing and make particular investments in particular areas. It's not going to happen by magic. So I do think that particular piece was important. But trying to include some, I think, data I think would be, useful, because then future councils will have an opportunity to look back at this particular document and be able to say, okay, so this is what was happening at that time. There's a way to be accountable in terms of really meeting the goals of the general vision. So I would agree with that.
Thank you.
Thank you, that was very helpful, and I've taken note to add that information in that section, and thank you, Councilmember Navarro, because the next comment we were going to cover is the one on social justice, and the comment is to add information on the Montgomery County MPDU program and to get that into the draft, and you'll see that the response is to have included that information in that paragraph.
Yeah, and just to add to that too, again, I think capturing, what we did in downtown Wheaton, I mean, that was predominantly a government investment to hopefully set the stage, right? It's not supposed to be the end all be all. Even Viva White Oak includes a significant government investment. And so I think we should, hopefully reflect more than just our MPDU's law, but, sort of also point to what we've done to set the stage, because a lot of times I don't think constituents even realize that, but there's only so much we can do, because at the end of the day, there's also the private sector that needs to step in. We're just setting the conditions and putting forth the environment. But I think that would be important as well, so that, again, future legislative bodies are able to kind of pick up from there and take it hopefully to the next level.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. The next comment is at the bottom of the same page, and it's in page 46 of the chapter, and it talks about, it's a quote basically from a book. It's not the author of the chapter's own words, but it talks about basically the quality of urban life as a commodity, and the comment was really that it is unclear how the quote reflects the current conditions in the county, or that it actually expresses the concerns of the community members during the public outreach that was done. And in response, just want to note that it's not just about the reference text is both about the value of providing amenities, but it's also about the authenticity of these amenities, so that it's not blind to what communities might also want to hold on to if they have culturally distinct and unique small businesses that all growth is not equivalent, and they don't necessarily feel good about the thought of growth that doesn't recognize their individual community.
Councilmember Navarro.
Yes, and I think in that particular section, for example, there could be a reference made to what the council did for the Wheaton Revitalization Project, where we passed a law, made that proposal to create the Small Business Impact Assistance Program, which actually began to provide the money and the technical assistance a year before the construction began, precisely to help mitigate the impact on those small businesses that were so dear to the community. And I think it was extraordinarily successful because they're still there. So to me, this is an example, again, of government-led investment to provide and mitigate the negative impacts, so that community wouldn't lose its flavor, its personality, its culture, right? I think we should, add a link or something to what, to that particular best practice.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Friedson.
Thanks. Yeah, I think here in the language that's proposed, I did not know what pacification by cappuccino meant, and I'll plead my own ignorance here. I learned what that meant, and further reading, I have now understood the point. Now, the point is, I think, well understood, the concern about what type of retail matters. The retail that reflects the community that it's in matters. So my only suggestion here would be that, in the interest of clarity, that we refine the language and that we make sure that it's clear what we're saying so everybody understands it. And perhaps it's my own cultural incompetence that I didn't understand that terminology of pacification by cappuccino. But I understand the point. I think it's an important point. I think the addition that Councilmember Navarro suggested, I think, is a really important one. I think we can and should talk about the ways that we've done this well, because there are instances where we've done it well. There are times where we haven't done it as well as we want to. And I think it's an important point to note, but I think we should make sure that the language is easily understood by anybody who reads this. I'll also note, if you're translating this document, I find it hard to imagine a scenario. I didn't understand it in English, but I find it hard to imagine that translating pacification by cappuccino or a phrase like that would be able to be understood in any other language by most people who'd be reading it. So I think we need to be sensitive about that as well. Not only do we have language that can be easily understood in English, but that when it's translated, that it's described in a way that could be translated into another language that would make sense, and that we avoid these kind of colloquial terms and idioms that certainly won't be understood by somebody who is speaking English as a second language, or we're interpreting it for someone who doesn't speak English at all. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, as we move forward, the next comment is on page 50 of the chapter, and it is a text that talks about, or is in regard to increased housing development, and that this is, the plan intends this to occur in areas where there are high concentrations of people of color and in low income, which is not perfectly matched with really what the plan is trying to do. And so you can see that there's edited language below that tries to more accurately depict, what the plan's philosophy is on housing, which is housing for everyone and not just new housing in areas of low income and areas where there are people of color.
Councilmember Reamer.
Yeah, I just think we should revise this piece here and get it right.
Okay, continuing on the next page, also on page 50, there's text. Again, it's really targeted at highlighting the issues of gentrification and integration, and the comment in reply is that the paragraph conflates the two processes, gentrification and integration, which can be related to one another but are usually described as in opposition to another. And again, you'll see that there is a proposed edit to the text there to more clearly get at, again, what the draft's goals are, which is to minimize gentrification and displacement while there is integration that hopefully is available to all. Okay.
I'm sorry, for my colleagues, we're just agreeing that we want to make some changes, I think. That's basically what we're doing. And we're not specifically wordsmithing new language now. We're giving direction to staff to come back to us.
Well, there is literally, there is text in the report that edits these things the way that I'm describing them, so I don't read the staff report to you, which is a little bit dull. I'm just trying to paraphrase them. If you want to send issue with any of the exact things, and I've heard a lot of comments today about please add, and so that's what I'm writing down and we're going to bring back to you.
Right.
But if this proposed edit has been okay, mostly I've seen nods of heads that it is. It's addressing what you need it to address, but then we will add additional stuff where I've noted.
I'm looking at the paragraph you just read that talks about the strategies seeks to integrate, gentrify.
Right.
I don't see specific
So
alternative
there's
language.
below that says comment, and then below says response. Staff suggests the following edit to clarify the policy, which is underlined is what gets added to promote racial equity and environmental diversity of housing in every neighborhood. The plan recommends targeted strategies be developed to minimize gentrification and displacement while promoting integration and avoiding concentrations of poverty. That is added. It strikes the language that starts that section and then it continues.
Got it.
Pardon me? Oh, maybe. The next edit is in reference to text that's on page 52. And it's a sentence that says, density brings economic opportunity, but it can also degrade the quality of natural resources, parks, schools, and neighborhoods. And the comment from Greater Washington is that the statement to them appears unsupported. It goes on to reference different things about development and types of development, that this would not necessarily be the case. So there is a suggested change to the language below that says encouraging growth. I preceded it by a sentence that was also already in the chapter that had been missing from this comment, so I think it's a little clearer where it came from, which is encouraging growth in already developed areas has ripple effects, and it says density brings economic opportunity, but can also strain existing infrastructure. That doesn't imply that it will, and it doesn't imply that that can't be addressed. It's just, again, much of what you're hearing from this chapter came from the information received from the focus groups and what their concerns are.
Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, I appreciate this edit. I think it's important. I just want to note here, we have this constant struggle in the county, and that the general plan is intended to speak to, of new residents versus existing residents. And that is at the heart of growth, how we grow, where we grow, whether we grow. And this issue is speaking to that, of this question of whether new residents are a burden or a blessing, and that general question that we have. This is directly tied really to racial equity and social justice, because newer residents tend to be more diverse than the county. We're getting more and more diverse every day, every week, every month, every year. The data overwhelmingly reflects that. So I think this is a good start to making that point. I think we need to make sure that it is extremely sensitive and is appropriate and reflects the broader policy goals of the plan and the county's broader policy goals as well here, because I think this is really at the core and at the center of the questions that we're trying to raise here and trying to begin to answer here, related to how we handle growth and what type of county we want, what type of communities we want to build, who we want to be part of those communities. I just think it's important that that be reflected, not just in this particular edit, but in the broader discussion of the plan and the manner in which we discuss new housing, new residents, new development, because I think it is really important as part of that conversation and part of that context.
Councilmember Navarro.
Yeah, so encouraging growth in already developed areas has ripple effects. Density brings economic opportunity. And so while I agree with that, but I think it brings more than just economic opportunity. It definitely brings, social, access to social, economic opportunities. It promotes racial equity and social justice if there are more types of housing available, so that people can have, can access housing, that is dignified. So I don't know. When I read it, I thought, God, this perpetuates this ongoing, rhetoric around the fact that the only reason why the council, approves more density is because they're in the pockets of developer, because it's all about, money making, blah, 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 blah. And, it's just always simplified into those talking points versus acknowledging that a lot of the people that has been stated that has been coming to the county are folks who are more diverse and people who are still trying to figure out how to access dignified housing. So I don't know, that just jumped out at me as kind of reinforcing that narrative. And I think it is important to acknowledge that it could strain these other kinds of infrastructure, but also there should be something in there that states how you can then work to mitigate that strain, right?
Well, I think, I don't mean to interrupt, but the next sentence, and it's unfortunate that gets broken by the page turning, but the continuing language, which I think is somewhat helpful, it's what you're saying is, it goes on to say, if the majority of new development if the majority of new development will occur in urban areas where existing naturally occurring affordable housing exists, it's just saying special attention needs to be paid to ensure.
I did read that, and I think, but I think we have been working, right, on achieving that. And so I think always, I don't know, including some examples or something like that might be useful, because if not, it just says that special attention needs to be paid as if we're starting from scratch. Because if we are going to, for example, leverage, existing, let's say an existing site that is close, adjacent to Metro, let's just say, you can make the argument that that will have a positive impact, because then people are not dealing with sprawl or something to that. You know what I mean? So I think there are particular policies that we have adopted that can mitigate this. The other issue is that, we've talked about this time and time again, when it comes to schools. I mean, when you look at some of the schools that have been overcrowded and you look at the history of what type of new residential development has occurred around it, you find a very little residential development has occurred around it. So there isn't a straight line or connection between, for example, school overcrowding and necessarily new residential development, because a lot of those families can't even afford whatever has been built. So again, I just think we need to be, we should use some examples of some of the things that we have had to face, and then how we have tried to mitigate, that issue with access to infrastructure as well, just as a guide.
Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Katz.
Thank you. I absolutely agree with what's just been said. I think we cannot just say that it brings economic opportunity when you're talking about that it's going to bring the possibility of what happens to the schools. I mean, obviously, economic opportunity usually is not necessarily the schools, what happens to a school. It's the people that are living there that happens to the schools, and economic opportunity, unless we're considering apartment buildings, et cetera, as part of the economic opportunity. Usually that has to be in addition. And then the other part is, it says, as the page turns here, literally one of these television shows, but as the page turns, it talks about existing infrastructure. Well, with new development, with new densities, there should be additional infrastructure as well. And so I think if something could be written in that says that it's not just going to be what is existing, it's not going to be like I'm taking the breadth that's already there, that there would be additional opportunities as well. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just had to write all this down. Rewatch the session. Very helpful. Thank you. On page 52, the next comment, the next text that's commented on is there, and its analysis of environmental quality shows that residents of the target areas where the majority of BIPOC and low-income residents live are more likely to be exposed to poor environmental conditions and live next to polluting land uses. And the comment is that there's no description of what this is the analysis for this or where it can be found, but it's actually trying to paraphrase what it's showing in the maps, or the one map with multiple components to it on page 53, which overlays targeted areas in the community with information on air quality, particulate matter, and watershed quality. And so there's edited text there to just be a lot more clear about what does that mean and what is that, those maps. And again, those maps will be clarified as we go through the process.
Mr. President?
Councilmember Joando.
Yeah. Ms. Dunn, I just, and I appreciate that clarification. What was the reasoning for changing? I know we like our own, everyone likes their own verbiage, but it looks like that second part of this sentence, you changed exposed to experience. Lower quality, is there?
I don't think it was intentional. We could go back to expose.
I'd prefer it.
Sure.
I just think, I don't, it's thank you.
Ms. Dunn?
Yes, sorry. Thank
No,
you.
you're
Just taking notes. Okay, if we're moving on, the next comment, page 53, again, is quite lengthy, and this is the one that is in the transportation section. I think this is the one that several of the council members today have already been talking about, or it's been on their mind. It's information brought forward by the consultant, listening to people's concerns about what they think about transportation and the proposed policies and practices that are in the draft that focus very heavily on walking, biking, pedestrian environments, and transit, things that we know are smart growth and that we have put a lot of effort into moving forward. And so there is a proposed edit to this section that tries to make a brief summary of the fact that the draft really is about, you know, mixed-use communities with a transportation network, but it also wants to recognize that what I think they heard through several of the focus groups was that cars to some portions of our community really matter. And so to their exclusion, they felt like their community experience is excluded. And so it's just recognizing that the general plan needs to touch everyone in the county, not just certain segments.
Councilmember Friedson?
Yeah, I appreciate that. The only thing that I would suggest is rather than the parking availability to make a living, I think transportation infrastructure available to make a living. I mean, I think that the response to the concern, which is absolutely legitimate, I'm a little hesitant to make it counter to the other goals of the plan. But I think the key is to make sure that in all of the decisions that we make as we move towards an ultimate policy goal, that we not leave anybody behind. And my sense is, and I don't want to speak for the consultant here, but that is the point that is being lifted up here, which is a really important point. But I think it's important to lift up the point, but not necessarily be prescriptive of, in order to solve that concern, you have to have parking in a certain place. And that, so I think keeping that more general as a concern, to me, would be appropriate.
Councilmember Katz?
Thank you. I'm in agreement with that, and it's also, I think the point was made, and it's not just the parking, it's that the fact that someone needs their truck. If you're a plumber, you need your truck to go to the job site where you're, so that it shouldn't be more than, I mean, their job site is their vehicle, and it moves from time to time. I don't know how we can write that in, but I think it should be noted. Thanks.
Great. Ms. Dunn?
Great, thank you. All right, we're page 52 of the report still. There was another quote that was of concern or commented on. There is concern that shifting of this new way of life will make it harder for them to survive, and in some instances this is true. So in context, what's before that quote, because I think it helps understand why it's there, is ideas such as congestion pricing and reduced parking requirements that promote good urbanism are sometimes outside of the reality of the working class people. And then it was the sentence, there is a concern that shifting of this new way of life will make it harder for them to survive. Staff has suggested, obviously, like just at least getting rid of the last part of that is, and in some instances this is true, we just don't know. And I don't think we need to propose that we do. But otherwise, given it's trying to, again, provide information on what people think about a variety of policies, I did not strike the whole thing.
Councilmember Friedson?
Yeah, I appreciate it. I think your suggestion here to eliminate the consultant's commentary and keep the voice of the folks who the consultant was hired to reach out to, it makes sense, and I appreciate that. I also think this might be another instance similar to what Councilmember Navarro has been asking for in other areas, to note how we intend to deal with that, how the plan intends to address that. Because we're lifting up a legitimate concern that has been raised, which is essentially how do I fit into this plan, and does this make it harder for me, even if other people are benefiting? And then the question is, of course, then raised, well, how are we addressing that legitimate concern? So I think, again, I don't have specific language to suggest right now, but if we could look into how we address that, I think that's what the concern was raised. Part of it was, do we need the commentary there that may or may not be substantiated? But then the other question is, a concern has been raised, generally in an argument you raise and you rebut, or you raise and you respond. In this case, I don't think we should rebut, but I think we need to respond, and I think we should provide some level of context of how we believe the plan as a long-term land use vision is intended to address the concern that has been raised.
Councilor Navarro.
Yeah, very quickly. So, making it harder for them to survive. Is it making it harder for them to survive, or making it harder for them to live in the county? I don't know. Making it harder to survive just kind of sounded weird to me, but so I wonder if it's more like making it harder for them to live in the county. The other piece to this has to do with the fact that working class folks, and as Councilmember Katz was saying, it also has an impact on the delivery of services that county residents are enjoying. So it's not just on them, it's also the fact that how are you then going to access, whatever, landscaping or these other things. So perhaps we need to also finish the thought that it could have that impact. And so therefore we're going to have to figure out how we address, some of that as well, because it does have an impact on the economy. We can't forget that these working class folks are part of our workforce as well.
Council Vice President Glass.
Thank you. Ms. Dunn, I want to take a step back and just better understand the context for this particular passage and the response that staff is proposing. Specifically references congestion pricing and reduced parking requirements. Is that referenced anywhere else in Thrive, in the document? And I'm just curious why those ideas are being spelled out here in the revised response.
I think they are in the transportation section under policies or practices, but I'd have to double check.
Okay.
Yes.
So that's the specific reference back. Okay. It's been some time since we talked about that, so thank you.
Okay.
Okay, the next is the comment, we are almost done, that there was a quote by a county resident that is, "I cannot take my letter on the purple line." And the comment from Greater Washington is they would like to see that removed because they think it only is the sentiment of one person and could undermine sort of this whole idea of that transit project. Council staff wasn't inclined to remove somebody's comment that the consultant had heard and felt was sufficient or important for the chapter, or provides more clarity. I think that being concerned that you can't take your ladder on transit doesn't mean transit's bad. It means that I felt like there's a lack of recognition of my vehicle is really where that was going. But that's up to the body.
Okay.
On page 55 is another comment. The draft says, if housing conditions continue on their trajectory as quite feasible, Montgomery County will cease to be a bedroom community, but a community that requires commuters from outside the region to staff its businesses. And the comment is that it's really not a correct statement. Montgomery County is no longer viewed as a bedroom community given its current employment. And so there's a edit by staff to take out that piece of it, that Montgomery County, just continue to read that Montgomery County could require even more commuters from outside the region, to continue the sentiment, but not the reference to it as a bedroom community.
Okay.
Okay. And then last, there were more global comments from Greater Washington about possibly including historical content related to Asian and Latin American immigration experiences, a further discussion of history and relevance of the Wedges and Corridor Plan, or to reintroduce text from the public hearing draft that noted that racial equity and social justice impacts of community participation in the planning process can be aimed at blocking development of new housing. Again, I think this gets to how much time there is to do the redrafting, and what of this can get done in a master planning process. What is the experience of different groups in areas where master planning is being done rather than expanding this chapter even further. There's a lot of recommendations to expand it right now. So that's up to the body.
Thank you. Councilmember Navarro, followed by Councilmember Friedson.
So I agree with you that I think, obviously there is a time limitation. However, I think earlier in the session, we talked about including almost like a snapshot of, what the county looks like right now. I don't think that should be that difficult. I think working with Selena, for example, because if you include even if it's like a one pager on like the changes, the demographic changes, for example, since 1980, how the population changed, what were the conditions, the Central American Wars, et cetera. You look at the demographic profile of the school system right now versus, 10, 20 years ago, you can reference the census. And for example, Montgomery College, and then even that map that showed, that continues to show the concentration of people who tend to be more low-income working class, and then reference that back to school systems map. So I just think it would be important to have some type of a snapshot of what Montgomery County looks like today, so that again, since this is a general plan, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, folks can kind of reflect and contrast and see, did we actually, was there success in making sure that these communities actually did thrive? Did we really, achieve that kind of racial equity and social justice that we all talk about, or not? So again, I don't think it has to be anything super intense. All that information is out there, readily available, to include. But I think it would be important.
Councilmember Friedson.
Thanks. Yeah, well, first of all, I think on that, I think it would be actually kind of interesting if you showed 1964 county demographics. Pick another date. 1980 was mentioned. That's basically the implementation of most of the key parts of the 64 plan, between MPDU and the agricultural reserves. Certainly there are other aspects, but, that would note that. You could even do 1994, the, last major update to the plan, and then today's demographics. So just to suggest that, I think you could put it on a few charts, and I think, we could have that done in, a few hours, I would think. And I think it would help tell the story of, in numbers, in data, of how we got to where we are and frankly who we are. So I think that is a really good point that I wanted to agree with. The other thing, I wasn't quick enough on my trigger here, but in the prior suggestion, I just want to note a similar thing again to what Councilmember Navarro was noting in prior examples. The more work needs to be put into understanding how to preserve naturally occurring affordable housing and establishing new affordable housing, that paragraph. I think it would be helpful here to provide some context of things that we actually have done. So acknowledge that it's not like we haven't done anything on this. We've done quite a bit. We just haven't done enough. And I think it would be helpful to provide some level of context, a sentence or two, while the county has, made strides, and then, highlight some examples of some of the areas in which we have been leaders in affordable housing. And then acknowledge, but more work needs to be done, and why more work needs to be done because of the disproportionate impact, I think would be helpful context here. So that'll yield back to you. Thanks.
Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you. In some of the sections where comments from some of the focus groups or participants are being conveyed, is there the opportunity to have the consultants share with us some of the additional comments of other participants in the focus group who perhaps they didn't include in their report to us? If I'm making sense here. I understand how we are hesitant to edit the comment of a focus group participant if that is that person's comment, but there were other comments that weren't included. And perhaps
Right.
some of those could be included to balance things out a little bit.
I'd have to check their appendix. I'm not sure whether we received, a listing of, in general, here are, a good variety or a representative list of the comments we received. We might be in the appendix. I just can't recall. So we can ask.
Investigate that a little bit and perhaps talk to the consultant
Thanks.
That concludes our review of the new chapters.
All right, thank you, colleagues. So that concludes this particular item on the agenda. I now need a motion to go into closed session to consult with counsel to obtain legal advice pursuant to Maryland Code General Provisions, Article 3305B1I. The topic is a personnel matter concerning one or more specific appointees, employees, or officials. Moved by Council Vice President Glass, seconded by Councilmember Hucker. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, Jerry. Go ahead.
I think, is that correct? I was suggested by the chair to serve on the Racial Equity, Social Justice. So I attended the meeting last night. I was on the Zoom call, and the county exec was there as well. And I guess kind of one of my suggestions was to kind of identify and codify the comments that have been made, how the document might look in the future. But again, this council, I want to say the chairman, the staff, Gwen, did a lot of time and effort. Some of the other commission members were out in the community. My personal focus has been on the White Oak. That was one of the first places I visited when I met my wife in 1965. It was high-rise buildings out there. I think to me, it's associated with the I-95 corridor. We are coming up on our 100th anniversary of the state-created joint county planning. So again, I think that cooperation is important, but kind of suggested, can there be like an addendum where the county exec would provide his comments and the staff, you would provide yours, but the council adopt the thing to move on, but recognizing that over time, things will change. I personally worked for Charlie Gilchrist, and I thought my role was implement what was planned. I worked for Harry Hughes as doing the Maryland Transportation Plan, and Secretary Volpe, governor from Massachusetts, and recommended that Congress put the D.C. freeway money into the metro system in Maryland, D.C., and Virginia. So things do change, but I really want to. Gwen has said she's leaving us, but it's a landmark for her and her staff accomplishing this, for you all to review it, and then for the county executive, but somehow kind of moving on without waiting for the next council to come in, made totally different perspective. But I think you're setting guidelines to the future, incorporating well-made comments, but kind of moving on with it. That's just my suggestion. By the way, I was also a commission officer. You made the comment about the Chesapeake Bay and the Potomac. I surveyed the Potomac and Chesapeake Bay. I was an officer on a ship running that, so I have that background too, as well as a planning degree. Did choose Rockville. My wife wanted sidewalks. They did. I selected a planned residential community that had single-family homes, had a high-rise like the Sam Ige building. The townhouse people opposed that. We had a shopping center, had a school, parks, and all that. So I think the county is in the right direction. It is. And I guess I was a Polish boy from the projects in Jersey City. They went to high school in Somerville next to Cambridge. Cambridge people would say it's Slumerville. So again, the county is changing. My wife is Jewish, I'm Polish. And those changes are occurring. The country is changing that way as well. So don't stymie the project, the effort that they put into it. Try to make your comments. The executive, give him a page or two to make comments. But let's move ahead and try to with the new council dealing with it. So those are my suggestions.
Thank you for those suggestions, and more importantly, thank you for your service, Jerry.
Thank you.
For many years now.
Thank you.
All right, we have a motion and a second to go into closed session. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And that is unanimous among all those present and virtual.
Aye.
Thank you.